This year for the garden, I had a bunch of plants that I wanted to start inside. But the question arises, where should I get the soil, right? Like the potting soil. I don't like to use store-bought potting mixes or soil mixes or anything like that, because for one thing, I have to buy them, and that involves spending money. And beyond that, I have been relatively unimpressed with a lot of soil mixes that I've bought, whether it's the lack of nutrients that they have and you eventually would have to supplement those nutrients in, or the peat moss that they can contain, right? And specifically, I don't like to use peat moss because, first of all, they have a variety of environmental ramifications that just aren't really that great. And secondly, when the peat moss dries out, it's really hard to resaturate. And for me, for my own experience, it's been very difficult to get the plants to have adequate water infiltration and percolation into the potting mix profile that contains that peat moss. Also, freshly planted seeds can get uncovered, right? The water can just kind of congregate on top. The seeds can get messed up with where they get planted. I can go on, but I really prefer to stay away from all that. And I want to be more self-sufficient anyway, right? I want to be able to produce my own potting mix and not have to overthink it, you know what I mean? But I'm also not worried about perfection, right? If I lose a few seedlings to a couple of insects that might be in that homemade potting mix, or if there are some diseases that I maybe lose 10% of that crop to, you know, I call that natural selection, and it's fine, right? So I want to be able to source these materials off of the local landscape. Now, I've used garden soil in the past, you know, and in a lot of this past, the garden soil that I've had access to has not been amazingly phenomenal, not incredibly rich in organic matter, and it's usually kind of dense. So it didn't really turn out that great for a lot of seedlings. They like a little bit of a lighter soil to them. So I kind of had to take a step back and kind of rethink how I can produce my own soil mix. Now, I've heard that mushroom soil or mushroom compost can be an excellent option for plants in general, and you know, and maybe starting some seedlings in that type of substrate as well. And it can definitely have some benefits for sure. But again, I don't want to buy it, you know, and you know, you have to really be careful about what source you get your mushroom soil from. You know, you don't want it to contain antibiotic residues or any certain pesticide or insecticide residues. Some people will, you know, spray for fungus gnats, and those insecticides can find their way into this mushroom soil. And that's just one example. So what if I could grow my own mushroom soil? And this is where the wine caps come in. Last year I incorporated wine caps into the garden. I like versatility in that the mushrooms are not only edible, but maybe they're also providing habitat for certain beneficial insects, but they're also benefiting the soil. You know, breaking down these tough lignified wood chips into something into a medium, a substrate that plants can extract nutrients from. So when I took a look at the area where I had grown the wine caps in last year, I found that the soil, or what was wood chips, was now largely soil. And it had some good mycelium in there as well, so some of the wine caps were overwintering, right? It was nice, loose, good water holding capacity. It looked like it was really promising for being able to cultivate plants in them. So I ended up using that for all of my seedlings that I started indoors before planting them out into the garden. And I quite honestly have not looked back. The plants overall, by and large, have grown a lot better than they ever have in the past. Larger leaves, bigger plants, faster growth, and the soil qualities were overall just excellent, right? Being able to water the plants in and have that soil, that substrate, hold the water for the plants, and being able to filter it through the soil. You know, this soil medium, it wasn't too dense, it wasn't too tightly packed, you know, it wasn't like any clay type thing, but it also wasn't super loose and super fine, where some of these finer particles could bury the seeds deeper or unearth the seeds, you know, and I'm, you know, not like the peat moss would. I especially want to point out the eggplants and the peppers, two crops that I have always had huge issues with growing indoors, starting indoors, right? In that the plants would be small, they would not look that great, and I just really have issues getting them to grow at any decent rate. But in this homemade mushroom soil, these plants really took off. Some of the largest eggplant leaves on seedlings that I have ever grown myself. So that's one thing that I'm really happy about. Right, the tallest pepper seedlings that I have ever grown before planting them outdoors. Just really happy, really blown away by the results. Right, I didn't notice any obvious nutrient deficiencies overall. Overall, the insects, other than a couple of centipedes that I found and I put back outside, there weren't any huge insect issues. Now, of course, I collected this mushroom substrate soil in about February and March, so when the ground is still kind of cold and frozen. So eventually, you do get once you get those growing degree days or whatever, you do get some of those small pantry moths and a couple of worms that I may have missed picking out earlier. But it's just kind of the nature of the beast. We're dealing with nature here, and it's just the way it's going to be. And it's totally against my philosophy to use any type of pesticide to control any of those issues, or any type of fumigation or irradiation or whatever. And overall, the seedlings that I may have lost to disease or any type of insect damage were largely minimal. A lot of these different mushroom species, and a lot of fungi in general, right, they will produce certain types of enzymes. And these are enzymes that will break down the tough cellulose, lignified, compounds that are in wood chips, and why it takes them so long to break down. Right, and so the enzymes that are largely responsible for this are the lignin peroxidase, cellulase, the hemicellulases, compounds of that nature that are going to lock into these lignins and celluloses, and kind of, it's kind of like a key, and these enzymes will break down these compounds so that this can become soil and organic matter and all of that. Additionally, the fungi and mushrooms, a lot of their mycelium and also their fruiting bodies contain chitin, right, which is used as a structural component in a lot of these fungal species. And it is actually a complex carbohydrate, despite the fact that it contains a nitrogen component. Organic compounds that contain a nitrogen component, you'd think protein, but this is actually a complex carbohydrate. But the nitrogen is important, right? Because nitrogen is, of course, very important for plant growth. The chitin in these fungal species contains this nitrogen. And so the chitin, right, so once the food source runs out, or as the fungi continue to grow and change and certain parts of it begin to break down, this chitin then enters into the soil, and it will be broken down by other enzymes like chitinase, right? And so the nitrogen will then be released from the chitin at that point and will be available for plant uptake. So this mushroom substrate still contains that chitin in that I'm planting the plants in, right? So that is basically a slow release nitrogen fertilizer. And also the fungal species of these wine cap mushrooms are still growing in this potting mix, right? And so they're able to continue to break down other compounds and other woody debris in this potting mix, and be able to make some of those nutrients, different nutrients, more available to the plants as well. Also with the chitin, right, when the plant roots sense or make contact with this chitin, it also stimulates an immune response in the plants. So since using this home-sourced wine cap mushroom made substrate and using it on all of the different plants that I have not looked back. This is definitely a method I'm going to use time and again in the future, one that I've had excellent success with. and I hope to continue to learn a lot more from it as well. But for the time being, it's produced a lot of really healthy plants that hold a lot of promise to be highly productive in the garden this year. Right, so this is another way that we can incorporate mushrooms into the garden, right? And not just for their food value, but also for their soil health enhancing capabilities that they have, right? And especially with the wine caps, for example, and other mushrooms like that that can live off of like substrate of wood chips and various debris that they can take and just turn into soil. And then we can use that soil, right? Whether it's just, you know, to enhance the soil life in the garden, or we use some of that as a potting mix to start certain plants indoors before the growing season starts. So thank you so much for checking out this video. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.